Hi, I'm Megan Bull, the founder and president of Reclaim Foundation, and today is World Cancer Day. Cancer is often defined and known for the physical ailments and difficulties it causes to the body. However, the lesser known effect of the cancer diagnosis, treatment, and remission journey is that of mental health. With over 100 types of cancer, there's a commonality among those diagnosed and the need for community. For World Cancer Day, Reclaim Foundation hopes to highlight two great organizations working on this underrepresented space. I'm honored to be chatting today with Jenna Benn Shersher, the founder and president of Twist Out Cancer, which provides psychosocial support to those impacted by cancer through creative arts programming, and Stephanie Lieber, the executive director of Imerman Angels, which matches survivors, family, and friends with one-on-one mentorship to guide them through the cancer journey. Welcome, Jenna and Stephanie.
Thank you.
So to start, let's break down some key terms that both of your organizations use. What is a cancer survivor, a previvor, and a caregiver?
Stephanie, you want to take this one or you want me to take it?
I'm happy to start. It's interesting. I think language is always, and Jenna, I assume you'll agree with me, language is always a really loaded thing in the cancer world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really individual, sort of what you define yourself as, what you call yourself, how you talk about your cancer experience is, we like to say it's really up to each person who's in it and living it. Most folks think about a cancer survivor as someone who is post-treatment. And some people think of themselves as a survivor the minute they finish surgery, the day they ring the bell at chemo. But again, it's really something you self-identify with where you are in sort of the end of generally the end of your treatment. A previvor is sort of a new word in the cancer world, folks who have some genetic predisposition to cancer. So often it means someone who hasn't had cancer but has a higher percentage or likelihood that they will. And caregiver is anyone who loves and supports someone who is dealing with cancer. It could be the child of someone, it could be a partner, a husband, a wife, a parent, a best friend. There's sort of a variety of different ways, but anyone who is supporting someone through cancer.
Great.
Can I also just add to that really quick? Because I totally agree with Stephanie that I think language is super important. And I know with my own experience, I had a lot of trouble figuring out where do I identify in this. And so at Twist, at least, the way that we've sort of tried to solve that, and it's not perfect at all, is that we talk about survivors as anyone that's heard those three words, you have cancer, because you've survived that life-changing experience. Mm-hmm. So we sort of group everyone into that, and we know that some people never hit remission and never hit cure. So who are we to say that they're not included as survivors? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how we define it. But it's so loaded and it's so personal. So, I think it's a really important distinction that Stephanie was making.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very similar to the trauma community. Some people never consider themselves a survivor of their trauma. But at Reclaim Foundation, we consider anyone that went through the trauma and is working on coming out the other side, they're already a survivor, no matter what survivor looks like to them.
Wow.
Important
well
discussion. So, Jenna, you not only work in the cancer nonprofit space, but you're a cancer survivor yourself. Can you share kind of that journey of cancer to nonprofit?
Yeah, it was definitely not expected. When I was studying and getting my master's in social work, I sort of in the back of my mind always dreamed about starting my own venture at some point, but I wasn't sure what I was going to be super passionate about. And then I got cancer at 29 and realized, well, I'm really passionate about this and figuring out how to fix some of the things that I experienced as I was going through it. So at 29, I was diagnosed with gray zone lymphoma, this super rare blood cancer. There was no information about my disease at the time. There was a Wikipedia page that essentially had two sentences, and it said, this has features of Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was about as basic as you get. There was no support community. There was, specific for gray zone lymphoma. So at the time, I started a Facebook group, and we're up to about 400 strong, and that consists of, I would say, probably the majority of gray zone lymphoma survivors around the world, but also some caregivers and supporters, family and friends that want to be able to support their loved ones. And so, when I was going through it, Johnny Imerman, who founded Imerman Angels, became a really dear friend. He was someone that I had heard about when I moved back to Chicago. Everyone that I was meeting in Chicago was saying, you got to meet this guy, Johnny. He's magnetic. He's amazing. You'll love him. And I kept kind of missing him, never met him. Then I was diagnosed with cancer and I realized I got to call this guy. And he just stuck around. He came to every chemo treatment of mine. He held my parents' hands when I was getting hooked up for the first time. I mean, he is just a treasure. I know, Stephanie, you know this. I mean, he is just a really special guy. And so, when I was going through it, I got hooked up with Imerman Angels and I felt super lucky to be able to be connected to another rare cancer survivor, Ethan Zahn, who served as my mentor. And similar to Ethan, which is how you and I connected, Megan, Ethan had similar protein differences. So I had like one extra protein that Ethan didn't have. But our cancers were about as similar as we were going to find, essentially. And so he served as my mentor while I was sick. And then when he relapsed, I sort of took on the role of mentor for him and just dished out a lot of the learnings that he had learned, but he was hearing differently as he was back in the patient role. So it was really interesting. And I felt so indebted to Johnny and to Imerman Angels because having that support system in place, it just allowed me to be able to share what was going on and be vulnerable and raw about my experience. And I realized how important it was to be open and honest about what you were experiencing. And that I think it really gave me sort of the courage to be able to be out front and outspoken about what I was experiencing. And so in terms of Twist, it started very organically. I was writing. I ended up was writing in a blog. It was on Blogger back in the day when that was like a thing. And, people started reading. I didn't understand why people were reading it really, like from places that I had no connection to. And then I ended up putting out a really ridiculous challenge. This is pre-TikTok, pre-Snapchat, pre all the things. And it was just me in my apartment, my studio apartment, dancing and doing the twist. And I said, who's joining me on the dance floor? And within a couple of days, we had couple thousand people twisting out cancer. And so that's where the name Twist Out Cancer comes from. And, as I started to build the movement that then turned into a nonprofit, it became very clear to me that the arts was sort of central to my experience. So writing and dancing and being able to express myself and have a platform to do that, that was super key to my healing. And it allowed me to build community. And so I took those experiences and then turned it into Twist Out Cancer. So yeah, that's the story in a nutshell.
Well, that you overcame so much and then created something so beautiful from it. Something key that you said was kind of that feeling of isolation, having those mentors. I think isolation, no matter how many people you're surrounded by, can be sometimes more of a mental thing than an actual physical isolation. Mm-hmm. And that's something we see a lot with trauma survivors themselves. So Stephanie, with your work at Imerman Angels, kind of providing that community is kind of a central part of Imerman Angels. Can you talk more about your organization and then how it combats those feelings and thoughts that cancer survivors are having?
Absolutely. But first, I just want to say I have heard Jenna's story a number of times now, and each time I hear it, there's something different and that catches me right here. And I just have the utmost respect for folks who can take their experience and throw the rope back to people who are going through what they have been through. And so every time I hear it, I get sort of choked up thinking about what that means, what that means for you and what that means for the people you're supporting. So I just want to say thank you. And every time I appreciate it more. So
yeah, it always comes across so simplified in a story, but I know all those feelings that came with it and the challenges, and it is really beautiful.
Oh, thank you guys. You're so sweet. It's very kind.
There's a lot of people who have an instinct to turn it off and say, I'm over. I don't ever want to talk about it again. And then there's a lot of people who say, I'm going to use this to change the world. And that's Jenna, so. So Imerman Angels. So it's interesting, this isolation. Johnny Imerman talks about when he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. He said he had the most incredible support system. He said people were flying in from across the country to sit with him during treatment. His mom and his brother never left his side, literally. But he said, despite all of this, he never felt more alone because he didn't know anyone who had gone through this like him. He couldn't turn to his mom and say, hey, mom, what's it like? What's it like to date after you've had testicular cancer? And you can't turn to your best friend and say, what's it going to feel like when the needle goes in? There is this immense sense of isolation and no one knows what I'm going through. And that's sort of why Imerman Angels exists. It's to provide this peer-to-peer psychosocial support. And it's beyond, we always like to talk about, people are more than their cancer diagnosis. Certainly when we match people, when we create these peer-to-peer matches between cancer fighters and survivors, caregivers and caregivers, cancer is at the forefront. We want to match someone who's had a similar diagnosis, perhaps a similar treatment, but we also want to match people based on who they are. I always tell the story about a friend of mine who was a marathon runner, and she was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. She was about to have a double mastectomy. And when she wanted a match, she said, I need to talk to someone who's a marathon runner and who has had a mastectomy. She said, I need to know that I'm going to be able to get back out there and what it's going to feel like to run. And, that's what this is about. It's about people to people. It's about relationships. It's about connections. It's about having a cancer confidant. And it's really ultimately it's about sort of providing light in the dark room of cancer. And that's, I think, what both of us do and aspire to do for our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a big piece of it is not just simply living, but trying to thrive again, being able to go out and run a marathon again.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And looking at your organizations, can you talk a little bit more about, the common feelings and then also how you've seen people transform through your organizations?
Yeah, I think that, isolation and loneliness is not only something that people experience while they're going through treatment, but that can last even well beyond treatment, just sort of a disconnect from your former self, from your former community, your family and friends. So we see that those kind of issues come up a lot. We see a lot of the issues that Stephanie mentioned that Johnny experienced, like the questions about intimacy and connection with others, trying to reconnect with a body that doesn't look the way that it used to or function the way that it used to. We also, I think, after folks go through Brushes with Cancer or Twist Shops, which are our main programs, we often see, this sort of finding of their voice in a way. And I think feeling this sense of empowerment to be able to advocate for themselves, to advocate for their story, to advocate for their needs, and even advocate for others. And I think that is such a common theme between Stephanie and I in terms of the work that we're doing, that we're trying to create space for people to be vulnerable, to open up about what they're going through so that they can get what they need. And I think we are seeing a lot of people being able to really activate their community and activate their resources to get their needs met. So I think that's a really beautiful part of the work that we're doing. And I also think, we talk about at Twist sort of the ripple effects that happen after our programs. And I would say, I think about what my experience has been like with Ethan. We are close friends. We are going to be in each other's lives forever. We're constantly connecting each other with different people that we feel like we should know. And I think those are sort of the intangibles that we can't always track, and we don't know how that's going to impact other people and their lives. And so I just, I think about, we've had people change careers. We've had people fall in love. We've had all different sort of major life changes that have happened as a result of participating and letting themselves have space to be able to process what they've gone through or what they're going through. So I think it's kind of an amazing thing to witness, quite honestly.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I have so many thoughts on this. We've done a lot of work in the last 2 years started with our staff and then with our community on training in grief and loss. Mm-hmm. And most people, when you think about that, it's, of course, we're in the cancer community and there is the obvious experience of losing someone. But loss in the cancer world is so much more than just that. It's sort of the loss of the life you thought you were going to have, loss of a body part, loss of a relationship, there's so much in there. And I think really thinking about that and understanding and talking about it and destigmatizing those conversations is so important in our world. And we're really trying to do more and do better there. The other thing that's interesting is, at least in our space, and my guess is similar to Jenna, people, immediately go to what a wonderful service to give the people who are currently going through cancer or supporting. The people are what we call support seekers or mentees. They're getting this help and this camaraderie and this, understanding. We don't talk enough about the benefits to the mentors, to the people who are serving as these advisors. People come to us all the time and talk about, I didn't understand, I couldn't process my experience until I became a mentor. Or we have a caregiver who said, I literally couldn't get out of bed after he had lost his son to leukemia until I was able to take my experience and turn it into something by becoming a mentor. So this sort of post-traumatic growth and the resiliency that comes with being able to offer this is such a profound thing for our mentors too. So I always like to make sure that I talk about that. It's, yes, we are providing a vital, important, crucial service to the people who are in the midst of their cancer journey. We're also providing something really profound for those folks who are serving as mentors.
Yeah, it's a form of reclaiming it for themselves, reclaiming the whole experience.
Yep.
The whole reason behind the name Reclaim Foundation is trying to repurpose what happened to you for yourself, taking the best of it and moving forward.
Wonderful.
The National Institute of Health is currently framing cancer as a form of trauma due to the feelings of isolation, PTSD with anniversaries, appointments, and those feelings of isolation and heightened anxiety. So trauma and cancer are becoming one of the same. Are these feelings similar to what you've been seeing in your survivors? And would you be considering trauma and cancer hand in hand?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm in some ways relieved that we're now talking about it like this, because I think for so long, cancer sort of was in a different category. We weren't focusing on the mental health impact of a cancer diagnosis, both on the individual, but also on the inner orbit, the families and friends that are, supporting that person. And I think the more that we're able to label it as such, the more that we're able to then provide resources for it. So, even this morning, I'm, 10 years out, I had a horrible nightmare that I relapsed. And so while my cancer experience was from 10 years ago, that narrative is still very much there. I still have fears of recurrence when I go in for scans or go in for any type of appointment. I'm always thinking about, is it coming back, or am I potentially having a new cancer come up? So I think that, the more that we sort of talk about it as a trauma, the better help that we can then, provide people in our community.
Yeah, everything that Jenna said, naming it, acknowledging it, and talking about it is so important in our space. Again, because it helps sort of destigmatize the conversations around all of this, around mental health, around trauma, around asking for help and acknowledging sort of, your feelings. My mom is a 41-year breast cancer survivor. And even though it's not an everyday part of her life anymore, in terms of appointments or treatment or whatever, it is still with her every single day. And me, people say, wow, how did you fall into this world of the cancer community? I fell into it because I lived it every day. Because when I was a little girl, I watched my mom go through cancer, and I still think about that and sort of the repercussions on her, the repercussions on me, on our family. There is absolutely trauma involved with it. It doesn't mean that it's something that sort of that it necessarily impacts your behavior every day, but it is part of you forever. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think cancer has such a heightened focus on those physical aspects, while trauma is a large focus on the mental health. So by being able to combine them, I'm hoping it starts bringing more recognition to the mental health of cancer patients and survivors. I know with Reclaim Foundation, we focus on that general term trauma and providing support to anyone with any type of trauma, because sometimes you connect better with people of a different type of trauma than your specific one, than the one directly in your category. So it'll be really interesting to see through the growth of Reclaim Foundation how some of the cancer survivors are able to connect with other forms of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And then are there any other resources or groups you would recommend to any cancer previvors or current survivors?
I mean, I think that both our organizations are doing so much and have, I think, I hate to use the word pivot, but that's what we've done. We've pivoted to the virtual space. And so I think checking out, obviously, our websites, because we actually have a twist shop that we're working on together in April, Imerman Angels and Twist Out Cancer. So that would be one I would say you must join. But yeah, I mean, we offer programming regularly throughout the week. And I know Stephanie's crew also is doing tons of work too. So, you know, I think in general, I mean, Imerman Angels is like my go-to when someone is newly diagnosed. And also oftentimes I'll reach out to the partner of someone that's been diagnosed because they're often sort of ignored in the process, especially in the beginning, and need an outlet. And they often don't have their person to be able to talk to and process with. So I would just say, like, I mean, knowing about Imerman Angels and having that as sort of like a go-to is just they're just an amazing organization. We feel so grateful to be able to work with you guys. You're doing incredible work. Yeah.
Likewise. Yeah. And I would just sort of echo that. Both of us have tons of resources on our websites and as part of sort of our newsletters and our ongoing communication that are cancer specific, that are specific to sort of whatever it may be. You know, I want yoga for survivors, or I want nutrition, or whatever it may be. But I also think just, you know, talking to folks who, you know, who have been there, that will guide you to sort of things that you didn't know you were interested in or that you wanted to explore more. So the cancer world is vast and wide and deep. So there's, you know, it's hard to give one or two ideas, but check out both of our sites, and I think you'll find a lot more.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And where can people find Twist Out Cancer and Imerman Angels?
So we're just at twistoutcancer.org, and you can find us on all the social media outlets too.
ImermanAngels.org, and likewise, all the social.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jenna and Stephanie. It was great chatting with you, and thank you for sharing your organizations.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.